Hey guys, I'm Steve, also known as Terramantis, and with Dauntless making its way to all modern consoles, I thought it'd be a good idea to cover some aspects of the game that are extremely important to becoming a better Slayer that the game itself doesn't really explain very well, or at all. Some of these topics are simply great tips that I wish I knew from the start, and some topics are for more advanced players or those who are at or along the way to the endgame. We'll dive into takedown mechanics and strategies for specific behemoths, the various status effects and how to combat them, the middleman and cell fusion, the best starting and endgame gear, as well as perk suggestions for the most powerful builds, and much more. So let's jump right into it. Here's 12 advanced tips for Dauntless. Alright, the first few topics are going to be primarily geared for newcomers to Dauntless, but they're extremely simple tips that are important and easy to miss nonetheless. And that first tip is, if you see them, grab ether wisps. Not only do these little wisps of ether increase your movement speed, but they also contribute to filling the meter to use your lantern's abilities. And snagging ether wisps is an easy way to help fill your lantern's ability for use, as well as speed around the map more quickly. And that speed will definitely come in handy when behemoths run away. Which brings me to the next topic, which is a simple one, but a good one. And that tip is, when behemoths flee, 9 times out of 10, the direction they're facing when they vanish is usually the direction they move to settle in for the next combat location. That's it, just a quick tip to help you pursue behemoths a bit faster. Alright, the next one is a vital mechanic to the core of Dauntless's combat, and that mechanic is timed heavy attacks for critical takedowns to stun a behemoth mid-attack, aka the boop. Before discovering this mechanic, I actually used to hate the Embermain fight, but now it's actually one of my favorites. Mastering the stunning interrupt can be very satisfying. But for some encounters like Embermain, which is an interrupt-heavy fight, it is vital for a smooth hunt. For many behemoths, to take advantage of this opening, the vulnerability window to do so is indicated by these red prompts around the behemoth's head. And this prompt can easily go unnoticed in the heat of combat. But all you have to do to interrupt and stun is time a heavy attack properly and the behemoth will go down. Not all behemoths have attacks where interrupt windows are telegraphed, and some openings are harder to land than others. So to help nail a few behemoths, here are a few strategies to take advantage of that stunning interrupt window. One of the easiest is Skarn. When it rears up on its hind legs, simply give him a whack. Skarn can also be interrupted during his blender spin of death. But honestly, stopping this one has some luck involved. I just usually spam my hammer's blunderbuss with the hopes of stopping it. Works pretty often, actually. Shrike is interruptible while it's swooping in for an attack. The swoop is usually right after Shrike hurls a tornado, so keep that in mind. And Karabakh also has an interrupt window on an attack almost identical to Shrike, minus the tornado and a bit faster movement. And Pingar does actually have an interrupt window while doing its barrel roll attack, but it's very hard to notice. In truth, I've never landed this one myself. I've only noticed the prompt. What else can I say besides the attack this interrupt is attached to just doesn't have much of a tell. Now Riftstalker and Embermain on the other hand have huge tells. Riftstalker can be interrupted almost every time it leaps out of a portal. When it does jump into a portal, this is the start of its attack animation as it's choosing a target to strike. So this is somewhat predictable. With that said, sometimes Riftstalker does do a tail whip attack instead, which does not have an interrupt window. Embermain can be interrupted while charging, and usually does this same attack several times one after the other. And Nashor has an interrupt window while sliding on its belly, to name a few. Like I said before, taking advantage of these timed windows is a vital mechanic to becoming a better Slayer in Dauntless. Another very important mechanic that I feel many newcomers to Dauntless struggle to understand in the early hours of the game is how danger, death, revive, and the hunt failure systems work. So let's talk about that briefly. The first thing to understand is the revive system. As with many games, when you or someone in your group's health drops to 0, you become knocked out. What's unique about Dauntless, however, is that while knocked out, each Slayer can consume 1 of 3 total revive stims to bring themselves back into the fight. Or alternatively, allies can help one another up to save those revive consumables. This is because if you go down and you're out of revive stims, well, then you have to wait for an ally to come bring you back up. The next aspect tied to the revive system is the danger meter. Simply put, the meter goes up when dangerous things happen. For instance, when your group is out of combat, it goes up extremely slowly. But when your group is in danger via combat with a behemoth, the meter increases more quickly. Also, when someone from your group is knocked out, a small percentage is added to the danger meter instantly. Also, while a member or members of your team are down, the meter climbs faster per downed Slayer. But when allies pick one another up, a small percentage is removed from the danger meter. Lastly, when the danger meter reaches the maximum of 100%, Slayers take increased damage and can no longer revive one another. In other words, when the danger meter is maxed, if all the Slayers are downed and no one in the group has any remaining revive stims, then the hunt becomes a failure. The only way to revive allies if the danger meter reaches 100% is to either cause the Behemoth to flee, which removes a sizable portion of the danger percentage, or to successfully finish the hunt by slaying the Behemoth. And that's how Death and Danger works in Dauntless. Which brings me to the next topic, status effects. What they do and how to combat them. Specifically related to the previous topic of revives though is the shocked status effect. One thing I think a lot of players don't know is that the shock status effect stops Slayers from using consumable items, interacting with ether vents, and preventing Slayers' ability to revive one another. Too often I see Slayers laying on the ground, raising the danger meter, while waiting for an ally to res them during a shock type Behemoth. Chances are if you're fighting an electric Behemoth, your teammates are unable to revive you because they're affected by shock. Just something to keep in mind. Next is the swarm effect, currently only inflicted by Karabakh, which causes very light damage over time, but more importantly and annoyingly, also interrupts your actions every second or so. But the swarm status can be removed by basically attacking the air. A few swings and the bugs are gone. Slayers can also swing at allies to help others if they're wielding weapons that have a tougher time removing swarm, like repeaters. Really though, swarm is a very easily avoided status effect. Just hit Karabakh in the face during this phase, and you completely miss it. Next is the wound and crippling wound status effect. If wound is inflicted, Slayers take increased damage, and whenever completely depleting stamina, take damage as well. Crippling wound, which comes later in the game, has the exact same status effect as wound, but also reduces the Slayer's stamina by 40%. To remove both wound and crippling wound, you can do one of two things. It's removed by healing from any source, including lifesteal, or by standing still 4 seconds. Now in contrast of wounds is the burning status effect. Instead of standing still to conserve stamina like while wounded, to remove the damage over time effect of burning, you must do the exact opposite. Roll around. Each roll removes 25% of the burning's remaining duration. 4 rolls and it's gone. Now before we go any further with more complex themes, let's first discuss how perks work and the theory craft behind creating and understanding a build in Dauntless. Really, it's pretty simple, but what's important to understand is that at the foundation of creating a build in Dauntless is that perks currently reach their maximum potency at +6. To increase a perk's strength, you have 2 things: equipment and cells. All equipment, which is weapons and armor, basically have 3 different milestones to their quality, and the amount the item contributes towards a perk is a reflection of that. For example, items from level 1 to 5 add 1 to perks. Items from level 6 to 9 add 2, and equipment of level 10 or higher adds 3 to its associated perk. Cells are similar but color-coded. Green cells add 1 to a perk, blue adds 2, and purple adds 3 towards the specified perk. So to reach a perk's maximum potency of +6, you can mix and match different weapons, armor, and cells. That's the very basic premise. But what's very important to note is that a build can have 6 different maxed perks in total. So that's what you want to think about when approaching a potential build. The 6 perks you think will work together well, and the equipment and cells needed to earn them. Now when you have your 6 perks in mind that you want to chase after, it's good to know how to obtain what you need. And simply enough, various lanterns are unlocked by completing quests throughout the main campaign. And then armor and weapons and lanterns are all crafted with parts from slaying behemoths. Some behemoth parts are more difficult to obtain than others, and I'll talk about farming unique circumstantial materials from behemoths a bit later. But for now though, let's discuss cells and how to get those first. Cells can be obtained in one of several ways: by opening cores, as drops from hunts, and finally cells can be purchased from the middleman with unique currencies, either platinum, which is real-world money, or ether dust, which is from breaking down unwanted cells. And these cells sold by the middleman change every week. So on that note, let's discuss cells, and more specifically, what the middleman can do to help you chase the perks you're after. And first and foremost, Cells and the perks they provide are separated into 5 different categories: defense, power, mobility, technique, and utility. And each category has 3 different tiers of rarity: green for common, blue for rare, and purple for epic. Cells of the same rarity can be fused at the Middleman to increase its rarity. In other words, fusing 2 greens results in 1 blue cell, and fusing 2 blues results in 1 purple, and purple is the max tier. You cannot fuse 2 epic cells together. During the fusion process of combining 2 greens into a blue, the cells cook for about 24 hours. And when fusing 2 blues into a purple, the cell cooks twice as long for about 48 hours. This fusion cook time can be skipped entirely at the cost of about 1 ace chip for every hour remaining in the fusion process. Unfortunately though, ace chips cost real-world money. So that's cell tiers, how rarities work when fusing, and the time it takes for cells to cook. But there's a little more to cell fusion than that. This is because if you have the cells for it, the randomness of cell fusion can be whittled down to an exact certainty. So let's start with the most certain process and work our way towards the most random method. The fusion process that has an exact outcome happens when combining cells at the Middleman that are both the exact same matching perks of the same rarity. If this is the case, then the result will be a higher tier version of that same perk. In other words, if 2 green overpower cells are fused, then the return will be a +2 blue overpower cell. And this works for any cell in every subcategory. Now the second method, which is a little less accurate, can be done by fusing 2 cells within the same category of defense, power, mobility, technique, or utility, but each with different perks. This fusion method will then result in a cell of all possible perks of the same category. In other words, fusing 2 mismatching defense perks of the same rarity will then generate a random cell of a higher tier from all possible skills, but only within the defensive subcategory. 2 mismatching powers create a power, 2 mobilities make a mobility, and so on. And the final means of cell fusion, but with the least certain outcome, is to fuse cells from different categories entirely. When fusing with this method, it will result in a higher cell, but it's chosen at random from all possible perks from all cell categories. In other words, if you fuse a random defense cell mixed with any cell category other than defense, say a power cell, then the result will be a higher tier of a completely random perk from all categories. I highly suggest never using this method when fusing at the Middleman. Try your best to stick to the first and second method of fusion. Alright, for the next one, let's talk about some of the best gear that's helpful from the beginning of the game to the finish. To start, not only is Nashor the first fight of the game, but also a lot of Nashor's gear is actually quite fantastic. Even at Endgame, I still swap out the chest, gloves, and boots when I'm putting together builds. The only piece I really never use is the cap. Additionally, the Nashor set is non-elemental neutral gear, so it doesn't have any additional elemental bonuses, but it also doesn't have any weaknesses either. Neutral gear works just as well for all encounters. Focusing on neutral armor instead of crafting every set of elemental armor will allow you to use those materials to craft and upgrade different weapons. So don't be afraid of crafting the Nashor set early on, as well as investing materials to upgrade it. It lasts a long time. Now as far as weapons are concerned, great starting weapons are Embermane and Shrike. Both have unique perks to deal additional part damage, and severing Behemoth's parts is very important for farming later in the game to craft high-level armor and weapons. For the next one, let's briefly cover how to obtain special materials from Behemoths later in the game. And the Behemoth parts I'm talking about are more difficult and circumstantial materials to obtain than normal parts. Those materials are gem and fury pieces. These situationally obtained materials are both gained from breaking the same Behemoth parts, but under differing circumstances. So first, let's separate them into gems and fury pieces, appendage type, and finally into neutral and elemental. Let's cover obtaining gems first. In order to obtain a material with the word gem in the title, the threat level of the Behemoth Patroller Pursuit must be 8 or higher, and the specified appendage in the name of the title must be removed within 2 minutes of first damaging the Behemoth. For example, if you're in need of an Elemental Tail gem, you'll need to sever any threat level 8 or higher Elemental Behemoth's tail within the first 2 minutes of initiating combat. If you're after a neutral Skull gem, then you'll need to break any neutral Behemoth's head within 2 minutes. The Claw gem requires limbs to be broken. Now, to obtain materials with the word Fury in the title is very similar to farming gems. the Pursuit or Patrol must be threat level 8 or higher, and the specified appendage associated with the material's name must be removed. The difference is, instead of being on a time limit like with gems, to obtain Fury materials the part must be broken while the Behemoth is enraged. You know, when the Behemoth is red and all glowy-eyed. So, the long and short of it is, to get a Fury plate you need to break the limbs. To get a Fury tail you have to cut the tail, and to get a Fury tooth you need to break the Behemoth's head. The Behemoth must be enraged at the time of breaking, and the threat level must be 8 or above. For elemental Fury parts, the Behemoth must be an elemental type, and to get neutral pieces, the Behemoth must be a neutral type. Now for cutting off these parts, two of the best perks that synergize well is Blade Storm and Sharpened. Both add a lot of part damage, which is what you're going to need to be chopping off parts. As far as armor is concerned, Blade Storm can only be found on the Karabakh chest piece, and Sharpened can only be found on the Drask gloves. To complement the armor though, Koshai's weapon does come with Sharpened, and Karbakh's weapon comes with Blade Storm. Since Sharpened and Blade Storm both require a weapon in order to have two pieces of equipment with the corresponding perk to reach its maximum level, that means one way or another you'll need a +3 cell for either Blade Storm or Sharpened to max them both out at +6. Personally, I suggest using the setup of Koshai's weapon and Drask gloves for a maximum Sharpen, and Karbakh's chest piece, which has a Technique cell slot, which is just right for maxing out Blade Storm with an epic cell. And on that note, Koshai's weapon does have a power cell as well. So actually, if you have the cells, you can have both max Sharpened and Blade Storm from just Koshai's weapon and Karabakh's chest. No matter how you get there though, Sharpened and Blade Storm are going to help you sever Behemoth's parts much faster. The next one is a quick tip for Hellion, and trust me when I say, Fireproof is worth working into your build, at least when you're up against the Scorched Stone variant of Hellion. In the earlier parts of the game, fire's just really not that big of a deal, but later, Scorched Stone Hellion has magma everywhere. Having maxed out Fireproof at +6 allows you to treat the lava as if it's really not even there with complete immunity. This one perk changes the fight from being pretty damn tough to really not that bad at all. So the easiest means to reach maximum fireproof by the time you encounter Scorched Stone is with this gear. The level 6 or higher Volcanic Helm from Charog, level 6 or higher Fiery Gauntlets from Embermane, and finally a blue fireproof cell in the helm. At endgame though, a max level Volcanic Helm with a +3 purple fireproof cell is definitely ideal. Or if you don't have the cell, a max level Volcanic Helm and Fiery Gauntlets to reach +6 fireproof works just fine. No matter how you get there, for the sake of your entire party of Slayers, I highly suggest working fireproof into your build, at least for Hellion. Alright, I think it's time to discuss my current favorite build in the game, the Undying Iceborn. Undying Iceborn is a high damage, very tanky, and self-sufficient build with amazing survivability. It'll help newcomers to Dauntless feel more powerful and competent, and veterans will be steamrolling Behemoths. In essence, I will start with a version of the build that can be created early on to help with progression, and then we'll work our way toward an endgame version. The great part about this build though, it's not restricted to any specific weapon type. It works pretty great for everything from repeaters to axes. But also, almost all of the gear is obtained from Behemoths that are encountered fairly early in the game, so it can literally take you from start to finish. Alright, so the thing to understand first is that at the heart of this build is two perks, Tough and Iceborn. Simply put, Iceborn and Tough synergize fantastically together. Rank 6 Iceborn decreases all damage by 30% and grants 8% lifesteal when you're at or below 50% health. Rank 6 Tough adds a large amount of health and increases healing by 50% from all sources. The idea here is staying at 50% HP during combat. With the 30% damage mitigation of Iceborn, you could actually think of it as being at 80% health at all times. Additionally, Iceborn's lifesteal of 8% might not sound like a lot, but with Tough's 50% bonus from all sources of healing, it's actually 12% lifesteal. And in that regard, harder hitting, slower weapons do tend to work better with this build since the lifesteal's 12% of damage dealt. In short, the bigger the damage, the bigger the heals. Personally, I love the hammer in Dauntless. It is my go-to weapon for this build. Now, speaking of damage for lifesteal, there are several perks that work very well with this same concept of staying at 50% HP. And those perks are Wild Frenzy, and Rage. Just like Iceborn, while under 50% HP, Wild Frenzy increases attack speed by 25%, and Rage increases damage by 25%. So that's 4 perks: Tough, Iceborn, Wild Frenzy, and Rage. There's still room for 2 more perks. Rage Hunter can easily be built in and is always a good choice for more damage, or several others, but personally, for my final 2 perks, I tend to use Conduit and Etheric Attunement. Conduit increases attack speed while using your lantern's hold ability, and Etheric Attunement increases the rate at which attacks generate energy to use your lantern's ability. In other words, if Conduit raises your attack speed by 25% while using a lantern skill, and if your lantern is Embermane or Shrike, then the ability of the lantern itself increases your attack speed as well. And if Wild Frenzy is going, that means your once slow hammer or axe turns into a wrecking ball, putting your attack speed somewhere between 65 and 80% faster, depending on the lantern used. Additionally, with Etheric Attunement generating so much lantern power, getting through a single combo of any hard-hitting weapon will basically refill your lantern's power to full, meaning Conduit's buff and your lantern's buff almost never turn off. All of this, when combined with lifesteal, makes you damn near invincible while everything is triggered. Now, as for the lantern itself, Embermane's Rapture does have a superior attack speed at 30%, but Shrike's Zeal is 15% for twice as long and applies to all Slayers within the affected aura. Further still, Conduit buffs all Slayers too, meaning Shrike's Zeal when paired with Conduit gives 40% attack speed to your entire party. And if I'm not mistaken, stacks with other Slayers' attack speed buffs if you're all standing in one another's aura. Long story short, Shrike's Zeal is my go-to, but I do use Embermane's Rapture when I'm running solo, or if I see a party has almost no melee users to take advantage of an aura's proximity. Alright, so those are the perks, the lanterns, and the idea behind the combat of the build. Now let's talk about the gear and cells to make this thing happen. Like I said at the start, Iceborn and Tough are at the core of this build, and Iceborn has the least amount of gear with the perk on it. In fact, currently Boreal March Leggings from Boreas is the only piece of gear with Iceborn. It's actually impossible to reach maximum Iceborn without cells. So if you're going to use the Middleman to fuse cells, I highly suggest starting with Iceborn. In fact, you're going to need 2 purple Iceborn cells as soon as you're able. So for Iceborn, until you have 2 max cells, you're going to need to use Boreal March Leggings and hope for some cell drops. Now, on the other side of the spectrum though, the Tough perk is on a lot of gear. For myself, I use Skarn's helmet and Nashor's chest piece for Tough. The helm and chest also have defensive cell slots, so if you're still working your way through the game, these slots will help you get Tough and Iceborn as close to level 6 as possible. Now, for the gloves, I either use Nashor's grips for Rage Hunter or Boreal's Might for Rage. Personally, I prefer the constant 25% damage buff of Rage over the situational 40% of Rage Hunter. But if I'm trying to farm Fury materials, I might switch. And finally, craft your weapon of choice upon reaching and defeating Riftstalker. Between the Riftstalker weapon and Boreal March's cell slot, these will help you work towards maxing out Wild Frenzy. So that's the basic setup for the build until endgame. Riftstalker weapon, Skarn helm, Nashor cloak, Boreal Might gloves, and Boreal March leggings. This will get you on your way with Tough, Iceborn, Rage, and Wild Frenzy. Then just fill the slots as best you can with what you have to increase those perks. And as for the utility slots, I always go for Conduit over Attunement if I have to make the choice. Now for the endgame version, after you've done some cell fusion, this is the final breakdown in gear. Honestly, not a lot changes. All you're doing is swapping 2 pieces, the gloves and leggings. The new gloves are Shocking Grasp from Nezaga, and the leggings are Volcanic Treads from Charrog. And starting from top to bottom, this is the breakdown of the cells you'll need. 1 Wild Frenzy cell to accompany your Riftstalker weapon, 2 conduits, 1 for your lantern and 1 in your weapon, 2 Iceborn, 1 in the helm and 1 in the chest piece, 1 Etheric Attunement in the gloves, and finally 1 Rage cell in the leggings. And that is the Undying Iceborn build. Alright, that's about it from me. Let me know if you have any questions about Dauntless in the comments section below. I'll do my best to answer everything I can. I really do hope this video helped you out in some way, and if you did find the video useful, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button. It really goes a long way with the success and searchability of videos, especially for a video that took as much work as this one. It helped me out a lot and I'd appreciate it. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to thank Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring this ridiculously long video that has absolutely nothing to do with razors or hygiene. Nonetheless, their support helps me keep the lights on and creating videos for you guys. So I guess I can spend 30 seconds talking about their products. And by products, I do mean products, plural. You might only know them as those subscription razor people, but Dollar Shave Club makes pretty much everything you can imagine that you might need for your everyday grooming rituals. As a matter of fact, they sent me a box filled with stuff, from shampoo and toothpaste to exfoliating pre-shave scrub and
shave butter.
Starter boxes contain sample sizes to see if you enjoy the products, and if you do, a restock box will begin to ship the same products at regular sizes and the normal price. And if that deal piques your interest, there's an exclusive link in the description box below. Alright guys, thanks for watching, thank you for supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.